G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome everyone. Today I'm interviewing Jye Smith from Double Star. He's based in Sydney, Australia. Thanks for your time today, Jye.
No, very good to be here.
Let's start with how we know each other. Bit of a Tasmanian connection up north in Launceston. Katrina from Wines of Tasmania, she normally comes along to our meetups there every 2 months. She put us in touch.
Yeah, no, Katrina's been a long-time friend of mine, and helping her get her business off the ground was, I think she's actually officially client 01 for Double Star.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Yeah, it's pretty deep connection going back 3 years or so.
Tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
Yeah, so Double Star Co. is a brand agency, and that really means that we focus on building an identity for a business. And a lot of people take that to mean like the logo and the website, and it certainly does. But my background's actually in communications and then later with PwC, helping prepare businesses for deals and acquisitions. And so a lot of the time, the brand, that is like what a brand means and what it does and how it behaves, isn't really seen through that kind of 360 lens. So we literally make money by developing a brand narrative or a brand strategy, turn that into a brand identity, colors, logos, all the pretty things, and then actually giving that brand a voice and a brand style guide. And then essentially we launch that brand. And probably more recently, we opened Double Star Films, which is actually because we just realized these brand stories that we were crafting needed to be told visually. And it's actually been a really big game changer for how we think about brands and businesses, but also how our clients kind of see us and the kind of, storytellers that we try to be.
Sorry, did you say you were at PwC?
Mm.
Yes, so was I. And the episode I've just recorded with Michelle Gavello, she's also in Sydney. She was at PwC at the same time, but she was in the London office, not the Melbourne one.
Yeah, I was in Hong Kong.
There we go.
It was an experience.
Yeah. How many years were you there?
Not even 18 months.
Yeah, I lasted 3 years. Yeah, it's a very different environment to work in, isn't it? It's a great company, but yeah, long hours.
It's unusual. I'll leave it at that.
How did you start out?
So essentially, like most little upstarts, I kept seeing people run advertising agencies and kept thinking that I could do this better myself. And essentially, and this was again the year before COVID, essentially I looked at what I was contributing to an agency that somebody else owned and was running fairly poorly. And really struck out on my own, first as like a consultant with the idea that I would help other agencies develop their culture and their service offering. I then fluked, although my business partner wouldn't say this, my business partner was made redundant, and I tried for years to say, come and join me, let's go do our own thing. And with 2 very young kids, he was just never in the right position. And then when his redundancy came along, I said, well, let's do it. Let's do it now. You've got nothing to lose, and let's throw in. And then quite literally, I'd been operating for a year, and I said, just, COVID had started, plug in your computer, I'll plug in mine. And then Katrina was probably the first person we called and said, hey, do you still need that website done? We'll build the brand and everything else. And then see how we did. And suddenly we're working with Adobe in month number 2. Again, just good relationships, previous agency experience, all those sorts of things. And then another very large Australian company called Advanced Navigation. And so with having 2 core clients built on, or 3 core clients built on good relationships, it became a really good way for us to test what did we really want to contribute to those businesses. And this was in 2020. So yeah, it's really interesting looking back at that and thinking it started really because I'd had enough, and it started for him because he was made redundant, unfortunately. And yeah, today it's still been the best decision we've ever made.
Yeah, fantastic. So officially started in 2019. How old were you then?
I'm 36 now. So what's that, 4 years ago?
33. I've had enough coffee today to work that out.
To do the maths. It wasn't
even with a slight hangover thanks to Crowded House, I could work that one out.
The Crowded House playing Tasmania last night.
Yeah, played in Hobart. It was amazing.
Oh my God,
so amazing. Good. I walked home. It wasn't far from where we're living at the moment. So yeah.
Wow, that's a story. I'd love to see Crowded House.
Yeah, that was the first time I saw them live. They were brilliant and funny as well, really funny. So I think two of
That's
his
good, isn't it?
it was great. Two of his sons was in the band as well. It was really, really
Of
sweet.
course, yeah, I have been following a bit of that.
Yeah.
And what was, what's interesting about like starting your own business, I think, is because when I was in high school, I started freelancing as a web designer to get people to buy me beer.
Yeah.
So I was like 14 or 15,
Yeah.
classic, spending too much time. And, this is 1998, spending too much time on a computer, taught myself a bit of HTML and a bit of Photoshop. And then I used to say to some of the older guys, I'm like, can you go get me a case and I'll finish that website for you? So I don't have to like, get an ID, fake ID or something.
Yeah.
So for me, it was natural. And for him, it was horrible. Like he wasn't really used to the hustle. He wasn't really used to, sorry, my business partner's name is Baptiste. Um, he wasn't really used to that hustle, but for me, it was pretty natural.
Yep. Great. Hustling for beer.
Yeah.
And do you have some key numbers you can share to illustrate the growth of the business?
Yeah, like for us, there are two main numbers. The first one's obviously revenue, the second one's growth. Like in a service business and the ad agency, you're kind of looking for anywhere from 20 to 30% margin, 35 if you can get it, 11 if you're running a real slim, lots of people business. But first year we made 200K, or no, 200, first year it's just made 200K. I think I think we write down the net profit being around 16 or 17 once I kind of worked out what tax tricks I could do, which tax tricks I couldn't do, how much of it was what, is termed very colloquially as a lifestyle business.
Yep.
And then in the second year operating with my partner and then essentially our first few staff, so an intern and a junior designer, we grew almost 300% and we
Wow.
just cleared under 750K.
That's awesome.
Margin stayed almost exactly the same the way we recorded, about 16%, which is low for a business like ours. But getting to the end of the year and saying, well, that worked pretty well. Like we surprised ourselves. And then in the last year, we just cleared over 1.2 million. So that was another 66% growth. And the margin increased to just under 20% then.
Yeah.
It was a surprise, but it was also really comforting and validating to know that we do know what we're doing and we knew how to price right. We weren't trying to go up against the big brand agencies who, charge $250,000 a project, and we were doing much more diverse things. But I think for myself, what it was really about was having some accountability to other people as well. So, I always tell the story to anyone who asks, I'm like, it's a Dolomite account that I'm still running, from being that weird generation of kids who were given a bank account by the by the banks at the time, and I'm like, it's very real for me to pay a team of people who I really love and appreciate from an account that I've had since I was 5.5 in kindergarten. It's all just a bit too real for me sometimes, but seeing numbers like this and even just preparing for this, I'm like, oh yeah, we did a really good job.
Yeah. So number of team members you started with full-time as yourself, how many full-time equivalents would you be up to now?
7.
That's fantastic growth, Jye, in 3 years. 1.2 million, yeah. 7 team members. Well done.
So it's pretty interesting with our business because we have like production staff and then like project management staff, and that's been the biggest interesting thing for us is looking at these numbers. There's lots of ways to get to the same number, but the thing that we've really prided ourselves on, almost to our detriment, was everyone had to be a practitioner. Now that's great until you realize that people are people, and there's a lot of softer things that we'd want to deliver on, and if we could spend more time going deep with our clients and having like really good producers who bring enormous value, which I'd certainly probably underappreciated it, to actually be able to grow to that bit bigger and be a bit more comfortable, but just have better results as well. So 7's bigger than we thought we'd take it, but it's a good number at the moment. And so now that we've had some really good growth, now it's about, okay, how do we optimize that growth? What are we really going to do to draw more profit, to be able to, even pay ourselves a little bit more? Like they become real questions when, you're looking at each other every day thinking, where do we go next with this?
So the focus is more on improving margin rather than growing top line and team?
Definitely for 22, 23.
Yeah.
That's been my focus. And for the team, it's always that thing where, because we are such a small team, it's like, how much do I talk about that? Am I the agency leader who talks about revenue and margin all the time, or should I be talking about the craft and the character of our business, or is it somewhere in the middle? And I kind of catch myself if I'm thinking a lot about the numbers, suddenly I'm talking a lot about the numbers. But in a creative business, our number one thing is to really make sure that people stay focused on the craft of what they're doing, because clients are clients. We don't work in a silo. We don't work. Agencies never work for themselves, and as much as you can pretend that they're a partnership or whatever else, they're not. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we're in the service business.
Yep. When was the moment you felt like you had succeeded?
It was when we would our first offsite. So we do a half yearly planning offsite, and this year we took everyone to the Hunter. Sorry, last year we took everyone to the Hunter Valley, and so it was a team of people. We're all staying in this one big place up in the Hunter, and we're doing like a few presentations and just some activities together. And I had this real moment when we'd finished our workshopping for the day. We're all sitting around this fire, getting ready to go for dinner, opening a bottle of wine, and a lady who worked for us, still the smartest, most creative woman I've ever met, and unfortunately moved to Melbourne, looked at me. She's like, "How does this feel?" And I just had this moment. I'm like, "It feels very real." And I'm like, "I feel like I've done something I can really be proud of now." It was really that moment of working hard, having a bit of reward, having done some more things that brought people together. That was the real moment, because it was a moment for myself as much as everyone else, and I just really enjoyed that. And like similarly, this year we went to totally different vein than going to the Hunter, but we went and did go-karting and skirmish and stayed in the QT hotel overnight. And again, it's such a delight to be able to do that. And then at the recovery breakfast the day after, everyone just, hung over around a cup of coffee. I'm like, "Oh, this is fucking awesome. Like, this is real. Like, it's a real company." And, I always say, I think my parents don't believe it's real.
Yeah.
I think they still think I'm just, mucking around the computers all these years later.
Just show them your Dolomites account. They'll believe it. Yeah, I was just talking to someone yesterday about that. That's really important. The strategy away days, start with just even half a day near the office, not in the office, build it up to one day, and then get to at least one night, if not two, if you can, away to do 2 or 3 days with your team. It's really important, not just for the communication and learning whatever topics you're working on in those workshops, but particularly the bonding and the rapport that's built between the team.
Yeah, it's something that, agencies' culture is very interesting. It's built on a tension that is kind of hard to describe, and it's even harder to manage, because you need tension in an agency for good creative outputs. And it's all built on how vulnerable a creative can be versus how strong a producer can be. So there's another business that I started called Cultura, and all it is about shaping agency cultures. And what it really is shaping small business cultures, because they're so small, they're so personal, and you've got to make so many choices every day, either as a leader or someone in the business, to say, what does this mean? How does this reflect? How does this resonate through the business? Because if you're under 10 people, 1 or 2 staff is 10 or 20% of the business. And suddenly that, I've had staff distract me too much, and I've had staff that I probably should have paid more attention to, because we are so small. And even in tiny businesses, it's amazing how quickly that can happen.
Yeah, totally agree. What does success look like to you?
Honestly, it's seeing a good brand of ours out in the market. So the other day we rebranded, or didn't rebrand, but we created a new brand for the masthead or group brand for the Canterbury Helston Park RSL group, which is a very big hospitality group out in not the west of Sydney, but the inner west of Sydney. And we had a 400-person gala to launch the new brand in the club, and there were circus performers and singers. And I'm like, we need to launch every brand like this. But it's being able to walk past a pole and look at a brand or a product and say, we put that brand on there. Like, what we do is so tangible compared to, content agencies or anything like that. It's like, we built this, how it looks, how it feels, what it should do. So just seeing it out there feels like success.
Perfect question for you. Number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
You know what? It's probably going to be the thing I'm worse at actually talking about, but where we see the hand up between brand and video is really interesting. So like, as brand strategists and creators, we do everything on the why and the what. And then when it becomes around the marketing on the how, our advice is fairly straightforward. Our advice is, if you've got one message, make sure it's just one message. Every time something's marketing becomes about 2, 3, or 4 things, or most commonly 5 things that somebody thinks is important, no one can remember it.
Yeah.
And it's because it's harder. It's harder to say one thing than it is to say five things. But if your marketing is about one clear proposition to your audience, you're always going to do a lot better, no matter whether it's video, social, content, influencers. You want to have a reputation that precedes you into a room. And that's around the fact that, tongue in cheek, but Bunnings means sausage sizzle.
Yeah.
Kmart means cool but daggy.
Yeah.
There are so many things that really stack up in people's minds because of how a brand markets itself, because every piece of marketing is a piece of brand behavior. And it's all got to come back to one thing and not five.
How did you fund the business?
Literally, I'm just my first project out the door, that went into the next piece. And then one day we had enough that we could afford a very cheap co-working space out in Ultimo, which unfortunately isn't there anymore. And then every employee came on as revenues increased. So just as the capital we generated out of the business. So, and it's been like that to this day. So, we've still never borrowed $1 and some money still left in the bank. So we're doing okay.
So no other investors, just yourself and your business partner?
Correct.
And what about grants? Have you looked at grants?
We have. Every time I get to one of those grant forms, actually, you know what grant I forgot we had? Because we got the COVID piece, I can't remember what it was called now. That was probably the only one. And, I think it's like $2,000 a month or something. But we are looking at grants. There's a piece of research that we're doing around brands and how they're being interpreted. And the second piece is around culture and what culture's changed over. They're the very specific projects we're looking at. As an agency of our size, and what we do is a little too, I'm allowed to call it pedestrian because it's mine, but it's pedestrian in terms of it's a brand agency, it's in the advertising industry. There's not a whole lot there, but it's definitely something I want to look at more.
Yeah. Have you looked at the Entrepreneurs Program grant?
No.
I'll shoot that through to you.
Yeah, sure.
$20,000 match, not competitive. You're entitled once you hit a certain, I think it's 1.5 million top line. So you wouldn't be far off it. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
With plenty of funding being if I just had money and would I do the same thing again?
Yeah, if someone backed a truck up and dumped a shit ton of cash at your front door, what would you do with it?
Oh, I'd still go and make the business, 100%. Yeah. I've thought about this a lot. I genuinely love what we do. I can't help but thinking about brands. I can't help but thinking about design. I can't help but try and give people advice they probably didn't ask for. It's something I'm truly obsessed with and truly passionate about. Probably the only difference is I'd probably do it in, a different area. It's definitely pre-COVID, choosing a place to bring everyone together is interesting. And that's probably the only thing I've ever looked at and considered elsewhere. And I'd probably build it out in the bush and, buy a big bit of land and everyone can have a little house on a big acreage or something.
Brilliant. Can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
The most stressful points are the points you probably don't expect. We expect clients to be upset with us sometimes. We expect people to, screw up and move on. But I think for me, the most stressful point was really negotiating openly and honestly with my business partner about what we both wanted out of the business. I think, we don't have an even 50-50 split. And that was a very deliberate decision made at the most stressful point because we wanted different things from the business. And there's a personal and emotional stress on that, which is very different than anything else. You've kind of got to be cold-hearted about it and objective, but at the same time, you can't be either of those things because you've got to have an enormous amount of empathy for anyone who works in your business. And it caused me a level of stress that I didn't anticipate, that I lost sleep over, that, became about money but wasn't really about money. And those things were incredibly stressful. Other than that, my genuine belief is most stresses you can deal with. And if you can't see a way out, then the best thing I've always done is to ask advice. And I've always been really lucky to be surrounded by, great mentors from all different parts of my life who are actually able to overcome it and see differently.
Yeah, great. We'll get to mentors in a moment. But I think what you've touched on there is a really important point. I believe in most situations, because you started first and then you brought your business partner in, it's not always appropriate to go 50-50. And it's a really hard conversation to have, but you really only need to have it once. So do the prep, talk to people who've been through it, get some good advice. I've turned up too late. Some people have asked for advice after the fact and it's been 50-50 and it's been a shit show from there in.
And interestingly, after that difficult conversation, everything was easier. Like
Yep.
everyone felt good about it. Like, and we've got a really strong relationship anyway. But it was difficult, but everything now is so much lighter. Like, and it feels like a long time ago. It wasn't really that long time ago, but it's just a non-issue now.
What area in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
God, that's a hard question. In terms of in terms of what we've had to work on the most, it's definitely about giving our staff the autonomy and the responsibility to be accountable to themselves. Because I've got a pretty big personality, and because I do a lot of random things beyond run the business, like I still am deep on the tools. It's very easy for me to get stuck in this. I'll fix everything for everyone, and I'll always give advice for people when they're not doing something the way I would do it. And actually, what we had to work on was everyone's going to do it their own way, and that's good. But the worst thing they can do is not think about things themselves and just do it because something was taken very literally, or that they get worried that someone else isn't going to like it. And over every year, that's been the most important piece. And a lot of businesses have values. So look, we come up with a lot of those values, and I think most of them are honestly fucking bullshit because they become things you write on a wall. Or the worst one I always see, especially with, I won't name any names, but especially with certain types of founders, it's like you want to be this person that you've put all these values against, and you're just not. And I'm like, it has nothing to do with that. For us, values are around these should create and give people permission around different behaviors. And one of our values is really around autonomy. And what we do is like, we expect you to act autonomously and to have autonomy so that when you help somebody else, your bed is made, your things are looked after. And so for us to really instill that into people, whether they're 2 years into their career or 2 days into their career or 20 years into their career, and that's, we've got some staff who are, that has been the most important thing because it leads on to such better decisions, better creative. It gives me a load off, so I know everyone's kind of looking after themselves, but it's definitely been the hardest to work for.
Yeah. Just on the vision and values, etc. The worst example I've heard was episode 218, Fred Joyle, who started 1-800-DENTIST in the late 80s and made millions and then lost it all. But they got some VCs in. They wanted to grow. They were pivoting to a SaaS product, but they appointed this arsehole CEO. And I shit you not, Fred said 2 weeks after the guy started, because in the foyer of their office, they had a lot of staff on the phone, obviously. They had their values painted on the wall in big letters, etc. 2 weeks in, this dickhead went and painted over them, like just white paint, just to get rid of them. You knew he was in trouble then.
It's just this. It's the strangest conversation, and we get to have it with a lot of founders, a lot of boards. And you say to them, what are our values? And they just say, they start with integrity.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if you need to write fucking integrity on the wall because you need to remind people to be honest with each other, what is wrong with you? Like, what is so wrong with you? Or the first four I get, I can literally bring out a folder from my Dropbox account and say, here are the values the last 10 CEOs have given me. And they're all the same thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do you truly believe these are your values, or do you think these are things you should do just as a normal, decent human being?
Yeah.
And I'm like, make them interesting, make them tied to your KPIs, make them tied to anything, but the stuff you think is important to, because if people write something on the wall, it looks better.
What have you enjoyed least about managing fast growth?
You have to change what you say and the standards you expect. What was okay 2 years ago isn't the same anymore, and you've got to be able to backtrack on things you say and reframe a lot of things for people. Not always a bad thing, but I think it's one of the most difficult things about growing fast, that this isn't okay anymore. We're at this size. We all need to level up, me included. You also aren't your own. The other piece that is equally as important, but probably harder to manage, is as a business owner, everyone's issue is somehow your issue as well. And so six other people telling me what's wrong with their day, I always say, it's like I'm holding rocks for somebody. And I'm like, I know you guys all hear it from each other. I'm like, but everyone brings me their rock and I just have to hold it with you guys. And I'm like, that's cool. I said, but it is difficult sometimes.
Yeah. I've got a little story. We were talking about Lark before we hit record when I was CEO there, the first CEO, not the last CEO. I pointed out, if anyone wants to Google the last CEO who was fired in January, February this year, 2022. Yeah, it was a family business I took over running, and so the culture was the parents made all the decisions. So everyone was going to them, and so I came up with this little phrase pretty early on, which I only had to use for about a month because everyone got used to my style pretty quickly. Which was they came to me for a decision, and it wasn't a big one, a strategic one or anything. And it was their corner of the business. They were a manager. They got the fucking title manager in their job title. I'd just say I make enough decisions on a day to run a small South Pacific nation. So you can make that decision. I'll give you my opinion, but it's your corner. You own it. Go for it.
Decision fatigue, like I didn't really realize what it was like until I probably started running my own business as well. Also, what I've learned is when I can make good decisions and when I make bad decisions. So I openly tell everyone, I'm like, if it's after 3 p.m., and I mean 15 minutes after 3 p.m., I can't make a decision. And
Yeah.
like literally, and not to be, like a Steve Jobs wanker, but literally wearing the same thing every day has changed my life. Like
Yeah.
literally changed my life. And like every 6 months, I go to AS Color, order 6 white shirts, 6 black shirts, 2 new pairs of skinny jeans, probably not every 6 months in skinny jeans, and just go out again. And I'm like, my life is easy now. Although some people then, when I wear color, have to point it out to me every day. I'm like, yeah, I know.
What do you love most about growing a small business?
Just the people. Like I know it sounds so contrived, but it truly is. Like I'm working now with people. So my executive producer, I've known her since 2006 or 2007. We've worked together in all sorts of businesses, and she continues to work with me to this day. Um, my business partner, he and I become really good friends, obviously inside and outside of business. And then my very old friends of mine, the youngest brother, he must have been 10 when we met, or even younger, but he now works for me as our senior designer. And so it is truly a little network of people I've known forever and being able to give people opportunity. And for me, there was a young finance manager who was about to be sent back home. He's originally from India. And I said to him, like, would you ever think about being a producer? Because I knew he was a choreographer and highly creative. He just happened to be an accountant. And he's like, oh, I don't think I know anything about it. I'm like, you ran the books for us for a long time, so I reckon you do. And so being able to give him, sponsor a visa, give him a whole new career path, train him up. He's the smartest bloke in the business by far. That for me was the most rewarding. Like being able to get a friend in a new position, new career, totally different future ahead of him. Because he did want to be an accountant, and he turns out he's a great producer. And I think unless someone was really doing what I wanted to do, which was not only look at him as a friend, but a friend who probably had skills that he didn't realize, that was really rewarding for me.
Yeah. What has been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
Probably what I worry about every day. So I don't check my email more than really once or twice a day now. I'm not reactive. I'm not sitting on waiting on things. I'm really just, making my own way, forging my own path. And it comes down to this great lesson that I can't even remember where I heard it from anymore. But it's think about yourself in 6 months and the decisions you wish you'd made 6 months beforehand. And as simple as that sounds, and the first time I heard it, I probably thought that sounds like the cover of a bad business book. I was like, actually, it's really handy for me because it's like in 6 months, well, I care I didn't check this one extra email.
Yeah.
Is it going to be the difference today between 20% growth or 30% growth? And then you realize the value that you bring as a leader, just doing small things every day consistently, just like health, gym, lifestyle, whatever it is, just makes such a huge impact. And it's not whether did you answer that email in 8 hours.
Yeah.
All the things you're told pretty much aren't true.
Yeah. The number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
It's really understanding the big picture. So again, trying to work out where you want to be in 6 months and think about what you can do today to make sure that happens. Don't get caught up being reactive. Don't be caught up being emotional. That 6 month window piece will take out all the emotion from your reaction to something. It'll take out your approach to helping staff perform better. It'll change your approach to getting staff out of the business quicker. If you need to, it'll allow you to reward people better. It'll allow you to do so many more things. And every month, every day I come in, I just think about the next 6 months. For me today, coming in, I'm like, oh, holy shit, there are 5 weeks left until Christmas. So whatever money's coming in now, guys, it's probably already come in. Don't sweat it. It's fine. Don't everyone freak out about January. Like, You can grin and bear a lot more stuff when you realize in 6 months, it's not the stuff you should have been sweating about.
Find it hard to define a clear strategy, then communicate it and execute it alongside the rest of your team? Or you currently don't work a simple quarterly strategic plan to boost your team's performance? Our Business Growth Formula online course is perfect for small business owners with 5 to 30 team members wanting to grow. We share the mindsets, habits and tools to be a legendary leader in your business. growasmallbusiness.com. Can you talk to how you've added people to the team, some wins, mistakes and advice for those listening?
I am a confident person, and I'm attracted to other people who are confident, and then you suddenly realize it's a terrible thing to be. I've made some terrible fucking hiring mistakes. I mean, terrible. Hired a con artist once. That was fun.
I've done that. I've got the t-shirt. Yeah.
Yeah. And if anyone ever does that, it is the most, you feel like it's a feeling I can't describe. To me, honestly, it's worse than being cheated on, because in business, you think you've got your shit together, you think you're well handled, you think you can see people for who they are, but it is blindsiding. And I truly became unhinged for a few days after it happened, because I'm like, how did I miss that? How did we all miss that? Like, is my viewpoint on the world not great? And I, will hire on, potential versus capability right now. But to be honest, I think it's a little idealistic. Especially if you're in a business of a certain size, you need people to perform.
Yep.
So I don't think it's about capability over like personality. I'm still a big believer in you shouldn't hire highly capable assholes, because then you'll just all be assholes and hate each other no matter what you do. But my mistakes have always been hiring too much on personality, not testing people enough on their skills. But then for like the story I told you about, young bloke who works for me, PJ, like he was the best decision I made, because I knew how accomplished he was in being an accountant and a finance manager. And I could easily see how those skills could translate. And he'd proven himself time and time again. And his personality matched to being able to be a great people person, a great product person.
What are some things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
I could speak for hours on culture growth. It's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. For me, it really comes down to having an understanding of how your team wants to come together. What are the rituals you have in place to allow people to come together to have discussions every day, every week, every month, every quarter, every year? Then it becomes around how do you interpret people's communication styles? We have really open conversations in our agency about how people communicate. Once I said, it was actually on a whiteboard just next to me before, but I'm like, here's how you talk to Baptiste, my business partner. And you can talk to him about these 3 things, and this is how you frame those 3 things, and that'll get you the result you want out of him, because he's so technical and so attuned to what you might be thinking to ask him, that if you ask a few little qualifiers before you ask him the big question, you're going to get a great answer out of people. And we have really open discussions around that on like, what's the style? What's the best way to engage? Because if you spend more time talking about communicating than actually just trying to communicate, you'll have a much better result, because people use examples that they've probably been trying to communicate for a while. So it's not about, getting everyone to fucking yogurt. It's not about taking them to the pub every Friday either. Those things are great. But culture ultimately comes down to those day-to-day communications, and somebody's at the desk at 8:55 or whenever it is, and they have that first Slack message pop up. Have you ruined their day because you've been a bit grouchy or a bit of an asshole for something? Or have you just been annoyed because somebody asked you a dumb question? And I'm the first person to say there are a lot of dumb questions out there. Like, it can just help if you help everyone understand communication styles, because everyone reads things wrong these days, because we Slack, we text, and that's great, and it keeps business running quick, but you need to be able to give people the skills to evolve as quickly as the technology.
Yeah, totally. And on that communication, do you use any behavioral models around that, like Myers-Briggs or DISC?
So I get everyone to take something called Fingerprint for Success.
Right.
And it's very similar to Myers-Briggs, but it's just a bit deeper. It costs $100 US per person. I'm still a big fan of Myers-Briggs. I know it's not meant to be outdated. I love knowing the history of that particular test now. It's really fascinating if you ever get into it. But I think any of those tools are good. Just use them, and use them with a grain of salt. And you know what everyone loves? Everyone loves having their little work horoscope, as I call them. Like, oh, you're this kind of person. And I've done Myers-Briggs enough to know which one I truly am and which one I need to be sometimes. So it's fun when you get to those levels of it as well.
Tell our audience how you've handled balance.
I escape to the bush and I go hunting, because it's as far away from the desk as possible. I'm also fairly regimented in how I set my day out. Like I try and my working hours are generally from 7:30 a.m. to about 3 p.m. And again, I'm just in the habit of working an 8-hour day. I don't think you have to. You can work longer, you can work shorter. But for me, at 3 o'clock, I'm done. I'm doing something creative, or I'm playing guitar, or I'm a big hobbies person, which I think helps being a business person, because if I can go deep on a data spreadsheet on a Friday afternoon or Friday morning, by midday every Friday, I'm done. So that's why I got a beer in my hand right now. It's Jye's half day on a Friday. It's good.
It's midday, mate.
Yeah.
That's great. How much professional development have you invested in yourself?
My own, I'm always doing skills courses, and I'm always doing like tool update courses. So like right now I'm relearning Adobe Premiere because I need to know it better. I need to understand it. I consume probably 2 to 3 hours of podcasts every day. My own podcast, before my podcast partner had her 2 beautiful children, that was how I learned most of the things I do. So it was called Maker and Creator. It's still up there, but that was the most interesting piece, like preparing for that talk, going deep into a topic. It was really good. And then for my team, it's the same thing, like making sure they're doing the courses, making sure they're doing things outside their normal day-to-day tasks, all those sorts of things. So for the team, it's at least an hour a week. For me, it's probably a lot more, just because I love it so much. But sometimes you've got to give people a push to do those things.
That's great. Yeah. Have you had mentors or coaches along the way?
Yeah, I've always had a really big network. I joined the Australian Interactive Media Industry Association when I was 19. Is my first job as their events manager. And it was suddenly this perfect world for me, running events, bringing people together. And right now, and so like my mentors and coaches, like were innumerable, but the ones who are still with me today, I've now known for 20 years, or almost 20 years. And now we're good friends. And so now I try and give that back to other organizations. So I'm currently the president of a nonprofit called Vibewire, which is a platform for young change makers and entrepreneurs. So like last night we ran a women's capability and confidence growth seminar, and we're running 4 of those. And so like I don't run this. Every time I say that, I'm like, I'm not the one running these. It's a wonderful young woman named Eliza, and she's putting on these courses. And then I'm also sit on the board of Awesome Foundation, giving away $1,000 micro grants every month. And so all those things are a way for me to mentor and coach other people back into those similar positions. And for me, it's just really rewarding to help people do their other pieces as well. And it's been a great part of that. Plus, there was some kid who wanted to launch a brand who was 15 because he hated high school, and his mum's like, "I need a freelancer to help me do this." I'm like, "No, I'll do the whole thing properly for you, like a $50,000 rebrand, and I'll help your son do what he really wants to do instead of wasting another day at high school." And that was an amazing thing to be able to give back.
Yeah, great. Do you have a board of directors or advisors?
Not formally, just a bunch of guys and wonderful people that I buy a beer for at the Redfern Surf Club every month.
Great.
And actually, what's been really interesting, and this is an important piece, is that the other agency owners, I make time to go and meet with them, even the ones who, quite only say, "Oh, I'm too busy," or how could you possibly have time to do this? I'm like, because I have a conversation where it's like, let's just go and have breakfast once a month, and you'll get more out of it than I'm sure spinning your own wheels. And so like that's been a really important part of like how I kind of build that informal advisory, but also like how I can again show other business owners how to kind of manage themselves.
All right, Joe, on our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
Managing people.
Shit, yeah. It's one of my favorite sayings. People are the hardest thing in small business, and where the value's at.
Yeah.
Favorite business book which has helped you the most?
This is really dorky. It's called The McKinsey Way, and it's a really old book, and I'm sure it's outdated now, but it just changed I can still remember it was the pinnacle book that changed how I thought about business.
Yeah, I haven't read that one. I'm adding that to my list now. Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
Yeah, the Mojo Sessions by Gary Birtwistle is a fantastic podcast, specifically on just great people doing great things, whether they're like ex-cons running like cartels out of Colombia, or whether it's the other side of that, FBI profilers. Like, it's just amazing. And then the other online learning tool that I probably use is again, it sounds dumb, but YouTube. Again, there's just some great speakers on there doing some really great things.
One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
So many. In terms of growing a business, I don't think you can look past having it sounds boring, but I don't think you can really look past your own Instagram account. Well, for me, it's Instagram. For other people, it's probably not. But like my business was built on my network from day one. And say what you want about social media. If you've got a good network and you know how to do it properly, it'll be your lifeblood.
Final, my favorite question. What would you tell yourself on day one of starting out 3 years ago?
It'll work quicker than you think it will. And when it does, it'll be better than you think it is. So relax.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for your time today, Jye. I think the audience get a lot of value out of what you share with us. Really enjoyed the chat. Congratulations to you and Baptiste and the rest of the team. Up around the $1.2 million mark now, 7 team members. That's terrific growth in 3 years. Congratulations.
Thanks, appreciate it.
And for our audience, we would greatly appreciate a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. More reviews means we bubble up higher in iTunes, etc. So more business owners looking for podcast help with their growth will find us.